Let's start. English Vocabulary, Volume 1.
Office. Office. 事務所やオフィス. For example, she works in a small office near the station. Office.
Reserve. Reserve. 予約する. For example, I want to reserve a room for 2 nights. Reserve. Discount. Discount. 割引. For example, this store offers a discount on weekends. Discount. Reply. Reply. 返信する. For example, I will reply to your email this afternoon. Reply. Neighbor. Neighbor. 隣人, 近所の人. For example, my neighbor often waters my plants when I travel. Neighbor. Borrow. Borrow. 借りる. For example, can I borrow your umbrella until tomorrow morning? Borrow. Meeting. Meeting. 会議, 打ち合わせ. For example, the meeting starts at 10 in the morning. Meeting. Departure. Departure. 出発. For example, the departure time is 9 in the morning. Departure. Refund. Refund. 返金. For example, I asked for a refund on the broken cup. Refund. Message. Message. 伝言. For example, she left a short message on my phone. Message. Furniture. Furniture. 家具. For example, we bought new furniture for our living room. Furniture. Complain. Complain. 不満を言う. For example, she complained to the waiter about the cold soup. Complain. Report. Report. 報告書, report. For example, I need to finish this report by Friday. Report. Arrival. Arrival. 到着. For example, we checked the arrival board at the airport. Arrival. Receipt. Receipt. Reshito. For example, please keep your receipt for the return. Receipt. Invite. Invite. 招待する. For example, they invited us to the welcome party tonight. Invite. Comfortable. Comfortable. 快適な, 心地よい. For example, this old armchair is very comfortable to sit in. Comfortable. Return. Return. 返品する, 戻す. For example, I need to return these shoes. They are too small. Return. Schedule. Schedule. 予定, schedule. For example, let's check the meeting schedule for next week. Schedule. Luggage. Luggage. 手荷物. For example, my luggage was too heavy for the flight. Luggage. Bill. Bill. 勘定書. For example, could we have the bill, please? Bill. Remind. Remind. 思い出させる. For example, please remind me to call the office tomorrow. Remind. Chore. Chore. 家事, 雑用. For example, washing the dishes is my least favorite chore. Chore. Choose. Choose. 選ぶ. For example, it was hard to choose between the 2 coats. Choose. Manager. Manager. 上司, 管理職. For example, my manager asked me to join the meeting. Manager. Passenger. Passenger. 乗客. For example, every passenger must wear a seatbelt. Passenger. Cash. Cash. 現金. For example, I paid for the coffee in cash. Cash. Suggest. Suggest. 提案する. For example, I suggest meeting at the station at noon. Suggest. Tidy. Tidy. きちんとした, 片付いた. For example, she keeps her desk neat and tidy every day. Tidy. Convenient. Convenient. 便利な. For example, the new station is very convenient for my commute. Convenient. Document. Document. 書類, 文書. For example, please print this document before the meeting. Document. Fare. Fare. 運賃. For example, the train fare went up last month. Fare. Recommend. Recommend. 勧める. For example, the waiter recommended the grilled fish. Recommend. Accept. Accept. 受け入れる. For example, she accepted our invitation with a smile. accept. Repair, repair. 修理する. For example, my father can repair almost any broken machine. Repair. Empty, empty. 空の. For example, the bottle was already empty when I opened it. Empty. Project, project. 計画, project. For example, our team is working on a new project. Project. Route, route. 経路. For example, this bus route goes to the old town. Route. Menu, menu, menu. For example, the menu has many vegetarian dishes. Menu. Respond, respond. 応答する. For example, please respond to my message by Friday. Respond. Laundry, laundry. 洗濯, 洗濯物. For example, I do the laundry twice every week. Laundry. Narrow, narrow. 狭い. For example, we walked down a narrow street to the old cafe. Narrow. Salary, salary. 給料, 給礼. For example, he gets his salary at the end of the month. Salary. Delay, delay. 遅れ. For example, there was a long delay because of the snow. Delay. Fresh, fresh. 新鮮な. For example, this market sells fresh vegetables every morning. Fresh. Mention, mention. 言及する. For example, she mentioned the new schedule in her email. Mention. Hobby, hobby. 趣味. For example, collecting old stamps is her favorite hobby. Hobby. Quickly, quickly. 素早く. For example, please finish the report quickly before lunch. Quickly. Training, training. 研修, 訓練. For example, new staff get 1 week of training. Training. Board, board. 乗り込む. For example, we will board the plane in 10 minutes. Board. Reasonable, reasonable. 手頃な. For example, the prices at this cafe are very reasonable. Reasonable. Discuss, discuss. 話し合う. For example, we need to discuss the plan over the phone. Discuss. Relax, relax. くつろぐ, リラックスする. For example, I like to relax with a book after dinner. Relax. Almost, almost. もう少しで. For example, I almost missed the bus this morning. Almost. Staff, staff. 職員, staff. For example, the office has about 20 staff members. Staff. Abroad, abroad. 海外へ. For example, she wants to travel abroad next summer. Abroad. Grocery, grocery. 食料品. For example, I buy my groceries at the local store. Grocery. Describe, describe. 描写する. For example, can you describe the man you saw? Describe. Exercise, exercise. 運動. For example, daily exercise keeps your body strong and healthy. Exercise. Crowd, crowd. 群衆. For example, a big crowd gathered in front of the station. Crowd. Boss, boss. 上司, boss. For example, my boss is very kind to everyone. Boss. Sightseeing, sightseeing. 観光. For example, we went sightseeing around the old castle. Sightseeing. Cashier, cashier. レジ係. For example, the cashier gave me my change. Cashier. Inform, inform. 知らせる. For example, please inform me if the time changes. Inform. Healthy, healthy. 健康的な. For example, eating vegetables every day keeps you healthy. Healthy. Shelf, shelf. 棚. For example, please put the cups back on the top shelf. Shelf. Desk, desk. 机, desk. For example, there is a computer on my desk. Desk. Flight, flight. 便. For example, our flight to Paris leaves at noon. Flight. Change, change お釣り For example, the clerk handed me the change quickly. Change.
Promise 約束する For example, he promised to call me back soon. Promise.
Recently 最近近頃 For example, I have recently started going to bed earlier. Recently. Package 小包 For example, a package arrived for you while you were out. Package. Email メール電子メール For example, I sent you an email this morning. Email. Airline 航空会社 For example, this airline offers free meals on long trips. Airline. Tip. For example, he left a small tip for the waiter. Tip. Receive. 受け取る For example, I received your message this morning. Receive. Weather. 天気天候 For example, the weather changes quickly in the mountains. Weather. Task. 仕事作業 For example, I have 3 tasks to do today. Task. Customs. 税関 For example, we had to open our bags at customs. Serve. That's it. For example, this restaurant serves breakfast all day. Serve. Forward. 転送する For example, could you forward this email to her? Forward. Season. 季節 For example, autumn is my favorite season of the year. Season. Team. 班 For example, our team meets every Monday morning. Team. Passport. パスポート旅券 For example, don't forget your passport at the airport. Passport. Spicy. 辛い For example, the curry was too spicy for me. Spicy. Greet. 挨拶する For example, she greeted the guests at the door. Greet. Humid. 湿気の多い蒸し暑い For example, summers here are very hot and humid. Order. 注文発注 For example, we received a large order today. Order. Baggage. 預け荷物 For example, please pick up your baggage at belt 3. Baggage. Dessert. デザート For example, we shared a chocolate dessert after dinner. Dessert. Introduce. 紹介する For example, let me introduce my new coworker to you. Introduce. Chilly. 肌寒い For example, it gets chilly here in the early morning. Chilly. Phone. 電話 For example, please answer the phone for me. Phone. Terminal. ターミナル For example, our gate is in the south terminal. Terminal. Price. 値段 For example, the price of milk went up last week. Price.
Thank. 感謝する For example, I want to thank you for your quick reply. Thank.
Daily. 毎日の日常の For example, brushing your teeth is part of your daily routine. Daily. Form. 用紙申込書 For example, please fill in this form with a pen. Form.
Platform. Helmet. For example, the train leaves from platform 2. Platform.
Expensive. Coconut. For example, that restaurant is too expensive for students. Expensive. Wonder. かなと思う気になる For example, I wonder if you could help me with this. Wonder. Routine. 決まった日課習慣 For example, my morning routine starts with a cup of coffee. Routine. Copy. コピーする For example, can you copy these papers for the meeting? Copy. aisle, aisle, 通路. For example, I prefer an aisle seat on long flights. Aisle.
afford, afford お金的に買える余裕がある For example, I can't afford that expensive watch. Afford.
Note, note, memo. For example, he left a note on my desk about the call. Note.
Mood, mood, 気分機嫌. For example, a short walk always improves my mood. Mood. Fix, fix, 直す、修理する. For example, can you fix the printer? It is broken. Fix. Vacancy, vacancy, 空室. For example, the hotel had no vacancy that night. Vacancy. Wallet, wallet, 財布. For example, he took some cash out of his wallet. Wallet.
Favor, favor, 頼み事. For example, may I ask you a small favor, please? Favor.
Nervous, nervous, 緊張した、不安な. For example, she felt nervous before her first speech. Nervous.
Attend, attend, 出席する、参加する. For example, I will attend the meeting this afternoon. Attend. Itinerary, itinerary, 旅程. For example, our itinerary includes 3 cities in 5 days. Itinerary. Booth, booth, ボックス席. For example, we sat in a quiet booth by the window. Booth.
Appointment, appointment, 面会の約束. For example, I have an appointment with the dentist today. Appointment.
Bored, bored, 退屈した. For example, the children felt bored on the rainy afternoon. Bored.
Hire, hire, 雇う、採用する. For example, the company will hire 2 new workers. Hire. Destination, destination, 目的地. For example, our final destination is a small beach town. Destination. Ingredient, ingredient, 材料. For example, fresh ingredients make this soup delicious. Ingredient. Invitation, invitation, 招待状. For example, thank you for the invitation to dinner. Invitation.
lonely, lonely 寂しい、孤独な For example, he felt lonely after his friends moved away. Lonely.
Print, print, 印刷する. For example, I need to print 10 copies of this page. Print. Depart, depart, 出発する. For example, the ferry departs from the North Pier. Depart. Snack, snack, 軽食. For example, she bought some snacks for the movie. Snack. Caller, caller, 電話をかけた人. For example, the caller did not leave a name. Caller. Calm, calm, 穏やかな、落ち着いた. For example, she stayed calm during the sudden storm. Calm. Send, send, 送る、送信する. For example, please send the file to all members. Send. Transfer, transfer, 乗り換える. For example, you must transfer trains at the next station. Transfer. Beverage, beverage, 飲み物. For example, the menu lists hot and cold beverages. Beverage. Voicemail, voicemail, 留守番電話の伝言. For example, she left a voicemail about the meeting. Voicemail.
Enjoy, enjoy, 楽しむ. For example, we really enjoy hiking on the weekends. Enjoy.
Check, check, 確認する、調べる. For example, please check the numbers before you send it. Check. Book, book, 予約する. For example, we booked a hotel near the station. Book.
Refill, refill おかわり For example, coffee refills are free at this diner. Refill.
Notice, notice, お知らせ. For example, there is a notice about the schedule change. Notice. Stretch, stretch, 伸ばす、ストレッチする. For example, you should stretch your legs before you run.
stretch. Sign, sign. 署名する、サインする。For example, please sign your name at the bottom. Sign. Luxury, luxury. 豪華さ. For example, they stayed in a luxury hotel by the sea. Luxury. Vendor, vendor. 売り手. For example, a street vendor sold us fresh fruit. Vendor. Reminder, reminder. リマインダー通知. For example, I set a reminder for the phone call. Reminder. Breathe, breathe. 呼吸する、息をする. For example, try to breathe slowly when you feel stressed. Breathe. Arrange, arrange. 手配する、段取りする. For example, I will arrange a meeting for next Monday. Arrange. Crowded, crowded. 混んでいる. For example, the morning train was very crowded today. Crowded. Tasty, tasty. おいしい. For example, the noodles here are really tasty. Tasty. Polite, polite. 礼儀正しい. For example, her email was short but very polite. Polite. Rest, rest. 休め、休息する. For example, you need to rest well to feel better. Rest. Prepare, prepare. 準備する. For example, I need to prepare the slides for tomorrow. Prepare. Nearby, nearby. 近くの. For example, we had coffee at a nearby cafe. Nearby. Portion, portion. 一人前. For example, the portion of rice was very large. Portion. Urgent, urgent. 緊急の. For example, this is an urgent message. Please call now. Urgent. Recover, recover. 回復する、治る. For example, it took a week to recover from my cold. Recover. Explain, explain. 説明する. For example, can you explain this plan to the team? Explain. Straight, straight. まっすぐに. For example, go straight and turn left at the bank. Straight. Purchase, purchase. 購入する. For example, she purchased a new bag at the mall. Purchase. Brief, brief. 簡潔な. For example, he sent a brief reply to my question. Brief. Decorate, decorate. 飾る、装飾する. For example, we decorate the house with flowers in spring. Decorate. Request, request. 頼む、依頼する. For example, he will request more time for the task. Request. Corner, corner. 書く. For example, the post office is on the corner. Corner. Clerk, clerk. 店員. For example, the clerk helped me find my size. Clerk. Directly, directly. 直接に. For example, please contact me directly by phone. Directly. Hang, hang. かける、吊るす. For example, please hang your coat on the hook by the door. Hang. Busy, busy. 忙しい. For example, I am very busy with work this week. Busy. Opposite, opposite. 向かい側の. For example, the station is on the opposite side of the road. Opposite. Grill, grill. 焼く. For example, they grilled chicken at the barbecue. Grill. Shortly, shortly. 間もなく. For example, I will call you back shortly. Shortly. Messy, messy. 散らかった、乱雑な. For example, his room was messy after the long weekend. Messy. Ready, ready. 準備ができた. For example, the report is ready for the meeting. Ready. Map, map. 地図. For example, let's look at the map before we leave. Map. Bakery, bakery. パン屋. For example, the bakery smells of fresh bread. Bakery. Cozy, cozy. 居心地の良い、暖かく快適な. For example, we spent a cozy evening by the warm fire. Cozy. Free, free. 手が空いた、暇な. For example, are you free at 3 this afternoon? Free. Guide. Guide. 案内人. For example, a local guide showed us the old temple. Guide. Sour. Sour. 酸っぱい. For example, this lemon juice tastes very sour. Sour. Indoors. Indoors. 屋内で、室内で. For example, we stayed indoors all day because of the rain. Indoors. Important. Important. 重要な、大切な. For example, this is an important email from the client. Important. Explore. Explore. 探検する. For example, we love to explore new cities on foot. Explore. Pay. Pay. 支払う. For example, you can pay by card or cash here. Pay. Often. Often. よく、しばしば. For example, we often take a walk after dinner together. Often. Late. Late. 遅れた、遅刻した. For example, sorry, I am late for the meeting. Late. Clearly. Clearly. はっきりと. For example, please explain the plan clearly. Clearly. Overnight. Overnight. 一晩中. For example, we traveled overnight by sleeper train. Overnight. Cheaply. Cheaply. 安く. For example, you can buy it cheaply at the market. Cheaply. Deliciously. Deliciously. 美味しく. For example, the cake smells deliciously sweet. Deliciously. Suddenly. Suddenly. 突然. For example, suddenly it began to rain hard. Suddenly. Seriously. Seriously. 真剣に. For example, she takes her work very seriously. Seriously. Smoothly. Smoothly. 順調に. For example, the trip went smoothly with no delays. Smoothly. Affordably. Affordably. 手頃に. For example, the shop sells clothes affordably. Affordably. Slightly. Slightly. 少し. For example, the soup is slightly salty. Slightly. Hardly. Hardly. ほとんどない. For example, I could hardly see in the dark room. Hardly. Honest. Honest. 正直な. For example, he is an honest and hardworking man. Honest. Distant. Distant. 遠くの. For example, we could see a distant mountain from the train. Distant. Cheap. Cheap. 安い. For example, these socks are really cheap. Cheap. Sweet. Sweet. 甘い. For example, this cake is very sweet. Sweet. Barely. Barely. かろうじて. For example, we barely caught the last train. Barely. Official. Official. 公式の. For example, this is the official company website. Official. Local. Local. 地元の. For example, we ate at a small local restaurant. Local. Pricey. Pricey. 高い. For example, that restaurant is a bit pricey. Pricey. Bitter. Bitter. 苦い. For example, black coffee tastes bitter. Bitter. Quietly. Quietly. 静かに. For example, she closed the door quietly so no one woke up. Quietly. Flexible. Flexible. 柔軟な. For example, our work hours are very flexible. Flexible. Foreign. Foreign. 外国の. For example, I enjoy trying foreign food on trips. Foreign. Costly. Costly. 高価な. For example, a new car is very costly. Costly. Salty. Salty. 塩辛い. For example, the soup is too salty. Salty. Sleepy. Sleepy. 眠い. For example, I feel sleepy after a big lunch. Sleepy. Helpful. Helpful. 助けになる. For example, the new worker is very helpful. Helpful. Spacious. Spacious. 広々とした. For example, our hotel room was bright and spacious. Spacious. Affordable. Affordable. 手頃な. For example, this phone is quite affordable. Affordable. fried, fried, 揚げた. For example, I love fried chicken. Fried. Tired, tired, 疲れた. For example, I am very tired after the long walk. Tired. Careful, careful, 注意深い. For example, please be careful with these documents. Careful. Bumpy, bumpy, でこぼこの. For example, the road was so bumpy that we shook a lot. Bumpy.
Inexpensive, inexpensive. 安価な. For example, we found an inexpensive hotel. Inexpensive.
Juicy, juicy, 汁気の多い. For example, this orange is very juicy. Juicy. Dizzy, dizzy, めまいがする. For example, I felt dizzy when I stood up too fast. Dizzy. Submit, submit, 提出する. For example, please submit your report by Friday. Submit. Land, land, 着陸する. For example, the plane landed safely at the airport. Land. Spare, spare, 予備の. For example, I keep some spare change in my bag. Spare. Crispy, crispy, パリパリした. For example, I like crispy fried potatoes. Crispy. Sunny, sunny, 晴れた. For example, it is a bright and sunny day. Sunny. Cooperate, cooperate, 協力する. For example, the two teams cooperated on the project. Cooperate. Roam, roam, 歩き回る. For example, we roamed the streets of the old city. Roam. Charge, charge, 請求する. For example, they charge $10 for delivery. Charge. Tender, tender, 柔らかい. For example, this meat is soft and tender. Tender. Cloudy, cloudy, 曇った. For example, the sky is gray and cloudy today. Cloudy. Organize, organize, 整理する. For example, she organized the files on her desk. Organize. Ride, ride, 乗る. For example, I ride my bike to school every day. Ride. Deliver, deliver, 配達する. For example, they will deliver the sofa tomorrow. Deliver. Bake, bake, 焼く. For example, I want to bake a cake for you. Bake. Windy, windy, 風の強い. For example, it is too windy to use an umbrella. Windy. Earn, earn, 稼ぐ. For example, she earns money by teaching English. Earn. Drive, drive, 運転する. For example, she drives to work in the morning. Drive. Deposit, deposit, 預ける. For example, I deposit money every month. Deposit. Boil, boil, 茹でる. For example, please boil the eggs for 10 minutes. Boil. Gloomy, gloomy, 陰気な. For example, the rainy day made everyone feel gloomy. Gloomy. Handle, handle, 対処する. For example, can you handle this problem yourself? Handle. Arrive, arrive, 到着する. For example, the bus will arrive in 10 minutes. Arrive. Exchange, exchange, 交換する. For example, can I exchange this for a bigger one? Exchange. Roast, roast, 炙り焼く. For example, we roast a chicken on Sundays. Roast. Frightened, frightened, 怯えた. For example, the loud sound made the dog frightened. Frightened. Quit, quit, やめる. For example, he decided to quit his job last week. Quit. Hike, hike, hiking する. For example, we hiked up the mountain all morning. Hiking. Oh, oh, 借りている. For example, I still owe you $10. Oh. Taste, taste, 味見する. For example, can I taste the soup? Taste. Yawn, yawn, あくびをする. For example,
I always yawn in boring meetings. Yawn.
Review. Review. 見直す. For example, let's review the plan before we start. Review. Pack. Pack. 荷造りす. For example, don't forget to pack warm clothes. Pack. Spend. Spend. 使う.
For example, I spend too much money on books. Spend.
Chew. Chew. 噛む. For example, you should chew your food well. Chew.
Sweep. Sweep. 掃く. For example, I sweep the floor every morning. Sweep.
Update. Update. 更新する. For example, please update the file with new data. Update. Cross. Cross. 渡る. For example, look both ways before you cross the street. Cross. Withdraw. Withdraw. 引き出す. For example, she went to withdraw some cash. Withdraw. Swallow. Swallow. 飲み込む. For example, chew well before you swallow. Swallow. Mop. Mop. 拭き掃除する. For example, he will mop the kitchen after dinner. Mop. Replace. Replace. 取り替える. For example, we need to replace the old printer. Replace.
Travel. Travel. 旅する. For example, they travel to a new country every year. Travel.
Trade. Trade. 交換する. For example, he wants to trade his old phone for a new one. Trade. Pour. Pour. 注ぐ. For example, she poured water into the glass. Pour. Wipe. Wipe. 拭く. For example, please wipe the table before we eat. Wipe. Remove. Remove. 取り除く. For example, please remove the old files from the desk. Remove. Sail. Sail. 船で進む. For example, the boat sailed slowly across the bay. Sail. Restock. Restock. 補充する. For example, they restock the shelves every morning. Restock. Stir. Stir. かき混ぜる. For example, stir the soup with a spoon. Stir. Fold. Fold. 畳む. For example, she folds the clean clothes neatly. Fold. Lead. Lead. 率いる. For example, she will lead the new project team. Lead. Rent. Rent. 借りる. For example, we rented a car for the weekend trip. Rent. Swap. Swap. 取り替える. For example, let's swap seats at the cafe. Swap. Peel. Peel. 皮を剥く. For example, please peel the apple for me. Peel. Vacuum. Vacuum. 掃除機をかける. For example, I vacuum the carpet once a week. Vacuum. Deadline. Deadline. 締め切り. For example, we must finish the report before the deadline. Deadline. Gate. Gate. 搭乗口. For example, our flight leaves from gate 12. Gate. Upgrade. Upgrade. グレードアップする. For example, I want to upgrade to a better model. Upgrade. Melt. Melt. 溶ける. For example, the butter melted in the pan. Melt. Cough. Cough. 咳を吸う. For example, I started to cough because of the cold air. Cough. Colleague. Colleague. 同僚. For example, my colleague helped me finish the work. Colleague. Ticket. Ticket. 切符. For example, I bought a train ticket at the machine. Ticket. Account. Account. 口座. For example, I opened a bank account last week. Account. Cook. Cook. 料理する. For example, I cook dinner every evening. Cook. Sneeze. Sneeze. くしゃみをする. For example, flowers make me sneeze in spring. Sneeze. Department. Department. 部署. For example, she works in the sales department.
Department. Seat. Seat. 座席. For example, please find your seat near the window. Seat. Balance. Balance. 残高. For example, I checked my balance before I bought it. Balance. Kitchen. Kitchen. 台所. For example, my mother is cooking in the kitchen. Kitchen. Swell. Swell. 腫れる. For example, my ankle began to swell after the fall. Swell. Employee. Employee. 従業員. For example, the company has many employees. Employee. Traffic. Traffic. 交通. For example, there was heavy traffic on the road today. Traffic. Bargain. Bargain. お買い得品. For example, this coat was a real bargain. Bargain. Chef. Chef. 料理人. For example, the chef cooked a wonderful dinner. Chef. Leak. Leak. 漏れる. For example, water began to leak from the old pipe. Leak. Employer. Employer. 雇用主. For example, my employer pays me every month. Employer. Subway. Subway. 地下鉄. For example, we took the subway to the museum. Subway. Brand. Brand. Brando. For example, she only buys her favorite brand. Brand. Waiter. Waiter. 給仕係. For example, the waiter brought us water. Waiter. Freeze. Freeze. Cold it. For example, the water in the bucket will freeze tonight. Freeze. Overtime. Overtime. 残業. For example, he worked overtime to finish the project. Overtime. Highway. Highway. 高速道路. For example, the bus drove fast on the highway. Highway. Cart. Cart. カート. For example, he pushed the cart through the store. Cart. Waitress. Waitress. 女性給仕係. For example, the waitress smiled at us kindly. Waitress. Pillow. Pillow. 枕. For example, this soft pillow helps me sleep well. Pillow.
Shift. Shift. Shifto. For example, I work the morning shift this week. Shifto.
Suitcase. 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 For example, she packed her suitcase for the trip. Suitcase. Catalog. Catalog. カタログ. For example, I found the lamp in the catalog. Catalog.
Dish. Dish. 料理. For example, this dish tastes very good. Dish.
Blanket. Blanket. 毛布. For example, she pulled the warm blanket over her shoulders. Blanket.
Supervisor. Supervisor. 上司. For example, my supervisor checked my work today. Supervisor. Lane. Lane. 車線. For example, please drive in the right lane. Lane. Debt. Debt. 借金. For example, he is trying to pay off his debt. Debt. Meal. Meal. 食事. For example, we had a big meal together. Meal. Towel. Towel. タオル. For example, please dry your hands with this towel. Towel. Customer. Customer. 客. For example, the customer asked about the new product. Customer. Crosswalk. Crosswalk. 横断歩道. For example, children should use the crosswalk to cross. Crosswalk. Goods. Goods. 商品. For example, the store sells many useful goods. Goods. Recipe. 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 For example, this recipe is easy to follow. Recipe. Curtain. 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 For example, she opened the curtain to let in the morning light. Curtain. Client. Client. 顧客. For example, we met our new client this morning. Client. Fuel. Fuel. 燃料. For example, the car needs more fuel to keep going. Fuel. Label. Label, ラベル. For example, read the label before you buy it. Label.
Plate, plate, 皿. For example, she put the cake on a plate. Plate.
Ceiling, ceiling, 天井. For example, a small light hangs from the ceiling. Ceiling. Budget, budget, 予算. For example, we need to plan the budget for next year. Budget. Parking, parking, 駐車場. For example, we found free parking near the hotel. Parking.
Loan, loan, loan. For example, they took out a loan for the car. Loan.
Bowl, bowl, bowl. For example, I ate a bowl of rice. Bowl. Sink, sink, 流し. For example, he washed the dishes in the kitchen sink. Sink. Profit, profit, 利益. For example, the shop made a small profit last month. Profit. Backpack, backpack, リュック. For example, he carried his backpack on the trail. Backpack. Merchandise, merchandise, 仕入れ商品. For example, the new merchandise arrived today. Merchandise. Fork, fork, fork. For example, he ate the salad with a fork. Fork. Drawer, drawer, 引き出し. For example, my socks are in the bottom drawer. Drawer. Income, income, 収入. For example, she saves part of her income every month. Income. Sidewalk, sidewalk, 歩道. For example, we walked along the sidewalk to the park. Sidewalk. Product, product, 製品. For example, this product is very popular now. Product. Knife, knife, knife. For example, I cut the bread with a knife. Knife. Kettle, kettle, やかん. For example, the kettle is hot, so please be careful. Kettle. Expense, expense, 費用. For example, travel is a big expense for our team. Expense. Bridge, bridge, 橋. For example, the train crossed a long bridge over the river. Bridge. Quality, quality, 品質. For example, this bag is good quality. Quality. Spoon, spoon, spoon. For example, she ate the soup with a spoon. Spoon. Broom, broom, ほうき. For example, she picked up the broom to clean the floor. Broom. Fee, fee, 料金. For example, the bank charges a small fee. Fee. Ferry, ferry, ferry. For example, we took a ferry to the island. Ferry. Sale, sale, 特売. For example, these shoes are on sale today. Sale. Napkin, napkin, napkin. For example, he wiped his mouth with a napkin. Napkin. Headache, headache, 頭痛. For example, I have a bad headache today. Headache. Agreement, agreement, 合意. For example, they reached an agreement after the meeting. Agreement. Vehicle, vehicle, 乗り物. For example, every vehicle must stop at the red light. Vehicle. Shopper, shopper, 買い物客. For example, many shoppers came to the new mall. Shopper. Oven, oven, oven. For example, the bread is hot from the oven. Oven. Fever, fever, 熱. For example, she stayed home because of a high fever. Fever. Goal, goal, 目標. For example, our goal is to sell more this year. Goal. Engine, engine, engine. For example, he started the engine and drove away. Engine. Total, total, 合計. For example, the total comes to $20. Total. Vegetable, vegetable, 野菜. For example, children should eat vegetables. Vegetable. Medicine, medicine, 薬. For example, take this medicine after every meal. Medicine.
Deal. Deal. 取引. For example, we made a good deal with the company. Deal.
Journey. Journey. 旅. For example, the journey by train took 6 hours. Journey. Buyer. Buyer.
買い手.
For example, the buyer chose the red one. Buyer. Sauce. 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 For example, I like tomato sauce on pasta. Sauce. Ladder. Ladder. はしご. For example, he climbed the ladder to fix the roof. Ladder.